Jay, I say we're lucky to have you because you're going to give us a bit of a fact check and a grounding on some of the rhetoric we've been hearing. This administration and DHS have been saying that there is a crisis at the southern border, and they're making it seem that if Democrats don't fund this wall, then they are going to perpetuate the crisis that we are seeing at this southern border that they claim is there.
Well, let's fact check. The reality is, as I know it's been said a number of times on this network, that illegal migration now is a fraction of what it used to be, say, 18 years ago. The high 18 years ago were 1.6 million apprehensions on our southern border. In recent years, in both the Obama and Trump administrations, it's been at the level of 300,000 or 400,000 annual apprehensions because of investments in border security. We built a wall pursuant to an act of Congress in 2006, where there is now 700 miles of wall in places where it makes sense, plus a lot more surveillance, vehicles, roads, additional Border Patrol personnel. So we've invested in smart ways in border security that has helped to bring down illegal migration on our southern border. Now, you talk to any border security expert, at least all those that I've talked to when I was in office, about what more we need. They will say more surveillance, more vehicles, more aircraft, more boats, more roads, more lighting, and perhaps some additional wall or fence in the places where it makes sense to do so. The problem with just simply building a wall and spending hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of taxpayer money to do that is you shouldn't build a wall in places where it makes no sense to build a wall, like in a remote desert or building a 10-foot wall on top of a 10,000-foot mountain. That is not a wise investment in taxpayer money. So my advice to those negotiating this is don't become too entrenched in a view, wall or no wall. And I see President Trump's own administration trying to walk away from the concept of simply a cement or steel wall. My successor, in her testimony a couple of weeks ago, tried to say we need wall, as if she was trying to walk away from the wall or a wall to more of a concept, or as Lindsey Graham put it, a metaphor, which includes a lot of different things. And I think that's the place we need to be.
So you think there's a compromise that can be made between where the Democrats stand right now, which is absolutely no money for building a cement wall or a border of that such, and Republicans saying without that we can't have any deal whatsoever?
I would urge Democrats and Republicans and this White House, and this could come down to simply a matter of semantics, to reach a compromise, to reopen the government, to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, put these 800,000 people back to work so they get paid, and reach a compromise that includes additional surveillance, additional fence, as the Republican Senate bill provides, additional lighting, perhaps some additional personnel, more immigration judges, by the way, and let's not get too hung up on the concept of an actual wall. There might be places along the southern border where the wall that exists could be fortified. I wouldn't rule that out, but I think that there are ways to reach common ground on this where both sides get to claim some form of victory. But at all costs, we need to reopen the government. The most basic function of civilian political leadership is to keep the government open and pay the workers, which is not happening right now.
We're now on day 12.
Can't forget that.
It's day 12 of that, Phil.
And I will tell you, if you've had the experience of running a government agency of 230,000 people in a shutdown or facing the prospect of a shutdown, what is happening right now has real consequences for real people who live paycheck to paycheck. There are members of the United States Coast Guard who are responsible for protecting our homeland, who are at sea for weeks and months, and they can't tell their families when they're going to get paid next. And before they set sail, somebody in the crew has to dispense cash from a Coast Guard mutual assistance fund so that the crew members can give their families cash to get them over the next pay period.
Your son is one of them.
Well, I don't like to talk about individual members of my family, but I will tell you that there are members of the Coast Guard who are at sea for weeks, if not months, and they can't tell their families when they're going to get paid next. And like most Americans, they live paycheck to paycheck. And that's an abysmal failure of our government leadership.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.